I was working the nighttime shift as an emergency medical technician, EMT. We received a dispatch call to respond to a remote location, colloquially referred to as the middle of nowhere, for a patient experiencing generalized pain. This vague description raised significant red flags, as it could encompass a wide range of conditions, from a minor injury to a life-threatening emergency. We arrived at the scene around 3 a.m., and our patient was an elderly woman who requested that we enter her residence through the garage rather than the front door. She had barricaded the main entrance with a television set, claiming she was fearful of potential intruders or, eerily, zombies. The garage was pitch black, and when we asked her to activate the lighting, she refused, explaining that squirrels had chewed through the electrical wires. My partner and I exchanged a skeptical glance, but we didn't think much of it, assuming it was just an unusual precautionary measure, possibly related to the Halloween season. Upon entering the house, we found a single mattress situated on the floor, with no other furniture present except for the television set blocking the front door. The patient was the elderly woman's daughter who was experiencing chronic pain. As we prepared to transport the daughter to the hospital, I noticed something peculiar about the elderly woman's behavior. I closed the ambulance door, leaving my partner and the patient inside, and approached the woman. She was now wearing an arm sling, which she hadn't had on previously, and attempted to hand me a Diet Coke for her daughter. When I politely declined, she became agitated, threw the soda can at me, and ran towards the house. However, she suddenly turned around, produced a knife from her clothing, and began advancing towards me. Fortunately, my partner opened the ambulance door to signal that he was ready to depart, startling the woman and providing me with just enough time to react. I quickly entered the ambulance, and we expedited our departure to the hospital. As we arrived at the hospital, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. The elderly woman's behavior had been erratic and frightening. I documented the incident in our report, including the knife threat, and informed my supervisor. After handing over the patient to the emergency department staff, my partner and I took a moment to debrief. We both agreed that the situation had been hazardous and unpredictable. I couldn't help but wonder what had triggered the woman's aggressive behavior. Was it a result of paranoia, dementia, or something more sinister? Our supervisor advised us to be cautious and aware of our surroundings, especially on night shifts. We continued our shift, responding to various calls, but the encounter with the elderly woman lingered in my mind. Later that night, we received a call from the hospital informing us that the daughter was stable, but the elderly woman had arrived at the emergency department demanding to see her. Hospital security had to intervene when she became belligerent and threatening. It was clear that the situation was more complex than we had initially thought. After finishing our shift, I went home, still shaken by the experience. I couldn't help but think about the potential dangers we face as EMTs, even in seemingly routine calls. The incident served as a stark reminder of the importance of situational awareness and trusting our instincts. It was a dark and spooky Halloween night, the kind that made you want to stay indoors with the lights on. I was a kid, home alone with my parents, trying to relax after a night of trick-or-treating. My friends and I had gone to every house in the neighborhood, our bags filled with candy and our costumes worn proudly. But now, as the night wore on, I was starting to feel a sense of unease. At first, I thought it was just the wind that made the old porch swing creak outside. But then I heard it again. A slow, deliberate creaking that sounded like someone was gently swaying back and forth. I tried to ignore it, but the sound sent shivers down my spine. I got up to investigate, my heart racing with anticipation. As I approached the window, I pulled back the curtains and peeked out. That's when I saw her, an older woman drenched in blood, clutching a massive kitchen knife and swaying gently on the swing. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and her presence seemed to draw the shadows closer. I was paralyzed with fear, my breath caught in my throat. I dashed into my parents' room, unable to scream or speak. My dad followed me to the front door, his face concerned. "What's wrong?" he whispered, But I couldn't answer. I just pointed to the window and he followed my gaze. He swung the door open and the woman locked eyes with us. Her gaze was piercing and mean like a witch's curse. My dad slammed the door shut, grabbed his gun, and prepared for the worst. The woman banged on the door, screaming, "Someone killed my husband, but it wasn't me." Her words sent chills down my spine. The police arrived, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. They approached the woman cautiously, but she raised the knife, and they deployed their tasers, subduing her. As they took her away, I couldn't help but wonder what dark forces had driven her to such a state. The rest of the night was a blur. The police asked us questions, and my parents tried to comfort me, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. The image of the woman on the swing, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, haunted me. The next day, we learned that the woman's husband had indeed been found dead, and she was the prime suspect. I was home alone on Halloween night, trying to distract myself from the creepy atmosphere with a marathon of horror movies. My parents had gone out to a costume party, leaving me to hand out candy to the trick-or-treaters. But as the storm raging outside intensified, I began to feel a sense of unease. As I watched the movies, I heard a knock at the door. I hesitated, wondering who could be out on a night like this. But when I opened the door, there was no one there. Just a carved pumpkin on the porch step, its twisted face seeming to leer at me. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but it only intensified as the night wore on. The strange noises escalated, creaks and groans that sounded like someone was trying to get in. I tried to tell myself it was just the old house settling, but deep down, I knew better. Then I heard a loud bang at the front door, like someone was trying to force their way in. My heart racing, I hid in the bathroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I had always been sensitive to the supernatural, and this house had a dark history. As I hid, I heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps that stopped right outside the bathroom door. I held my breath, frozen with terror. The doorknob started to turn, and I knew I was running out of time. Just as the door creaked open, my parents burst into the house, their costumes dripping with rain. "What's going on?" my mom asked, her voice frantic. But before I could answer, a police officer rushed in, gun drawn. "You're safe now," he said, helping me out of the bathroom. As we emerged into the hallway, I saw the intruder being taken away in handcuffs. He was a tall, gaunt figure with sunken eyes and a twisted grin. I shuddered at the sight of him. My neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, was standing in the hallway, her face pale with worry. "I saw him lurking around and called the police," she said, her voice shaking. My parents rushed over to hug me, their faces etched with worry. "We were so scared when we saw the police cars outside," my dad said, his voice trembling. I was taken to the police station to give a statement, my heart still racing with fear. As I sat in the station, I couldn't help but think about how close I had come to death. If Mrs. Jenkins hadn't called the police, who knows what would have happened? The officer who had rescued me, Officer Johnson, came over to talk to me. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, his face grim. "This guy was wanted for a string of burglaries in the area. He's not going to hurt anyone else." My parents sat on either side of me, holding my hands tightly. "We're just glad you're safe," my mom said, her voice choked with emotion. I nodded, still trying to process what had happened. It had been a night of terror, but thanks to Mrs. Jenkins, Officer Johnson, and my parents, I was safe. It was Halloween night, and the streets were filled with costume kids and their parents, trick-or-treating from house to house. My cousin and I had volunteered to drive some of the younger kids from church to their trick-or-treating destinations and chaperone them as they collected candy. We had loaded up my truck with 7 excited kids, ranging in age from 6 to 12, and were making our way down the street, their costumes and laughter filling the air. As we walked, the porch lights casting spooky shadows on the ground, I heard a familiar sound that didn't quite register at first. It was a sharp, metallic noise, like a BB gun firing. But I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just a kid playing with a toy. Then I heard it again, and felt something whiz past me, hitting the concrete with a loud thud. That's when I realized someone was shooting a pellet gun. The kids were all screaming and crying now, and I was trying to corral them, telling them to stay close and stay safe. My cousin sprang into action, sprinting towards a nearby yard and grabbing a chunk of gravel from the driveway. With his 92-mile-per-hour fastball accuracy, he hurled the gravel at the shooter, knocking him out of a tree and onto the ground. The porch lights seemed to flicker with an eerie intensity as the chaos unfolded. The kids were all huddled together, their costumes torn and their candy scattered. My cousin was standing over the shooter, his fists clenched and his face twisted in anger. As we waited for the authorities to arrive, I checked on the little girl who had been shot. She was lying on the ground, her eye bleeding profusely, and her parents were frantic with worry. I tried to comfort them, telling them that help was on the way, but it was clear that the situation was dire. The police and ambulance arrived, their sirens piercing the night air, and the shooter was taken away in handcuffs. The little girl was rushed to the hospital, where she would undergo emergency surgery to try and save her eye. The rest of the night was a blur. We gave statements to the police, and the kids were all taken home, shaken but safe. My cousin and I were left standing there, trying to process what had just happened. As we drove home, the streets empty and dark now. My cousin was quiet, his face still etched with anger. I knew he was thinking about the little girl and the senseless violence that had occurred. I was thinking about it too, wondering how something like this could happen on a night that was supposed to be fun and carefree. The aftermath of the incident was devastating. The little girl lost her eye, and the shooter faced charges of assault with a deadly weapon and another count. It was a Halloween night that none of us would ever forget. You must have heard the story of the Pixie Sticks candy incident. It's a tragic and shocking tale that happened on Halloween night in 1974 in the small town of Pasadena, Texas. Some of you might know this story, but for those who don't, let me tell you what happened. It was a dark and stormy Halloween night in 1974. The small town of Pasadena, Texas was bustling with children trick-or-treating. But amidst the laughter and excitement, a sinister plot was unfolding. 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien was out trick-or-treating with his friends, collecting candy and having the time of his life. But as the night wore on, Timothy began to feel sick. He complained of a bitter taste and stomach pain, but his friends and family thought it was just a stomach bug. As the hours passed, Timothy's condition worsened. He stumbled and fell, and his parents rushed him to the hospital. But it was too late. Timothy died, and the doctors were baffled by the cause of death. The police were called, and an investigation began. They questioned Timothy's family and friends, but no one seemed to know anything. The police were stumped. As the days went by, more children fell ill, all with the same symptoms as Timothy. The police were racing against time to find the killer before they struck again. The investigation led them to a surprising suspect, Timothy's own father, Ronald Clark O'Brien. But why would a father kill his own son? As the police dug deeper, they uncovered a shocking motive. Ronald had taken out a life insurance policy on Timothy, worth $20,000. He was deeply in debt and saw the policy as a way out.